It's so wonderful to see you all here, and I give you a big welcome to our Careers in Climate Action Expo kickoff with alumni and industry leaders. And it's presented in collaboration with the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability, the Mangoni Center for Career Success, and a collaboration with all of Harvard's professional schools and MIT. And my name is Leslie Hubbard. I'm the Assistant Director at the Salata Institute, and it's my pleasure to see all of you here today. We have students, alumni, industry partners here in person and also on the live stream. And you are all passionate about shaping a more sustainable and just future, which gives me personal hope. And today's event serves as our pre-Expo kickoff for tomorrow's Climate and Sustainability Career Expo. And it's designed to give you a closer look at the organizations participating in this week's program. We'll learn about their missions, the challenges that they're working on solving, and the opportunities that they're creating for you. You'll hear directly from leaders and innovators across sectors about how you can be part of this work as interns, researchers, collaborators, and potentially future employers. And over the next few hours, you'll experience a couple different formats. We have panels, keynotes, and reverse pitches, which each offer a different perspective on climate careers. You'll hear from startups driving innovation, nonprofits who are shaping policy, and institutions working on everything from climate finance and biodiversity to energy access and design. And we'll conclude this evening with a networking session next door in Tickner Lounge where you can continue the conversations and ask these important questions. So thank you to all of our speakers, to the moderators, and to the volunteers and staff for making this possible. And I'm excited to start with our first panel. So I'd like to please welcome to this stage our moderator, Sijia Jiang, who is a master's in design student, or an environmental studies and landscape architecture student at the Graduate School of Design, and she's also a Salata Institute ambassador. So welcome, and please all of the panelists join her on the stage.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Panel 1, Empowering Climate and Sustainability Leaders, Building the Workforce for Change. My name is Sijia Jiang. I'm current graduate student at Harvard Graduate School of Design, serving as student ambassador at Salata Institute. It's truly my honor to be your moderator today. This panel is to explore how we can bridge the gap between climate awareness and real-world impact, and to learn what skills, opportunities, and mindsets can empower all of us to lead more effectively. We joined by 5 amazing speakers today. Let me introduce them. Anshuman Babna, CEO of Teridu. Matthias Moyer-Bauer, COO and co-founder of 1.5. Emily Miglin, Executive Director of Peaceboat US. Mateus Lima, Fellowship Coordinator at Clean Energy Leadership Institute. Kannan Sruvengada, Executive Director of Eastern Forum. And I'd like to invite each of you to give a very brief introduction about yourself and your organization, just a 2 or 3 sentences to let audience know who you are and what brings you to this conversation today.
Any order you want us to go in?
Maybe from you, is that okay?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kannan. I'm really glad to be here and happy to see so many people interested in climate action and looking towards climate careers. I was a tech person myself and made the mistake of studying climate science and immediately got freaked out and left my career and sort of started on a path of how can I act on climate. And I had a little bit of a savings and I went through and quickly burnt through the savings, but experimented with various things and eventually ended up starting a farm. And the farm is in East Boston, not far from here, even though you have to cross the Atlantic to get there. The farm is a climate-oriented initiative that engages people, engages youth, brings people close to their farmers, the source of food, closer to earth, giving everyone a chance to grow food themselves, letting young people come and learn, get paid to learn about our food systems, about our ecosystems, and about how to learn for having a greener careers. And we also run a food program that's about connecting local farmers with local consumers while addressing food security and helping community members support each other. So that's Eastie Farm. My name is Kanan. I'm really glad to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Kanan. I'm going to pass the mic. I'm Emily McLone, and I work as the director of a nonprofit organization called Peace Boat US. This is my second time here at Harvard, so thank you so much to Salata Institute and everybody for having us. I work as a director that is based in the United Nations Plaza in New York, and our organization has its headquarters in Tokyo. We are an international NGO that uses a ship to travel the world. It's called the Peace Boat. We visit around 20 countries every 3 months promoting peace and sustainable development. We have our youth internship programs at our office in New York, and also a Youth for the SDG Scholarship Program. We also have our youth scholar here, Karen, who's in the front, and I'm really excited to be here today, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. First of all, big plug for what Emily does at Peaceport. Peaceport is this incredible organization that, among other things, the founders won a Nobel Prize along with a bunch of other people in the incredible work that they've done. So please do follow them. My name is Anshuman Bapna. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Terra.do, like just do it. And this is the world's largest platform for learning and working in climate. So what we do is that we run very practice-oriented programs in climate and sustainability for professionals who want to transition into climate. We also run a job board that has tens of thousands of jobs. And one of the cool things about doing what I do is that we get these incredible set of people coming in from all parts of the world. So we've graduated almost 10,000 people across 90 plus countries now, 2/3 of them working in climate. And we've had all kinds of second order effects happen, including 100 startups, both for-profit and non-profit, have come out of Terra. And my favorite is a political party that came out in the UK that actually won a couple of seats in the elections a couple of years back. So lots of interesting stuff that I would love to chat with you about.
Wow. Huge fan of Terra.do and Peace Boat as well. Your farm sounds incredible, by the way. And I'm going to hear about this other Matthias on the stage here. I'm not sure how you pronounce yours, but maybe we can work through that in the discussion today. Great to be here. My name is Matthias Mühlbauer, originally from Australia. That's where the accent's from. Please stop me if you can't understand, and I'll try and translate into American. My background is in my villain origin stories in PwC in Australia, working in M&A strategy and operations consulting. Very exciting, but I was working in energy and industrial sectors. And with that, Australia has a very extractive past and present. And so I got fairly disenchanted with working in those industries, a lot of workforce transformations, which results in a lot of layoffs, and ended up doing my Eat, Pray, Love journey, doing my MBA, spent some time in Tokyo at this wonderful business school, and I did a second year at Yale School of Management. Sorry for mentioning some rivalry in the room. I don't want to make it awkward. 5 years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, we started 1.5, myself and another Australian. We do two things. We're a climate advisory, so we're helping large organizations decarbonize. And then we're also a training provider as well, platform called 1.5 Academy. And to date, we don't have the same numbers as Terra.do, but we have a really great community. We've had about 1,000 graduates over 2.5 years across 70 countries, an NPS of 73. People really, really love our work. As we see the green skills required for the climate transition, let me give you a couple quick stats to help frame it. By 2030, we need to reach 1.5 trillion in energy infrastructure investments. After 2030 to 2050, this is according to the International Energy Agency, we need 4.5 trillion spent every year, of which those solutions are not going to be put into the ground, installed, deployed without the people, the workforce behind that. And that's at the heart of what we do at 1.5. So great to be here, excited to talk about the workforce of the future and also get to the bottom of how we pronounce Matthias, I think, on the panel. So great to be here. I'll pass it over to Matthias.
Well, Mateus Lima. I have been called Matthias, have been called Matthias, Matt, Mateus, every little pronunciation.
Same here. Yeah, man, I feel you.
I'm fun, glad we're like sitting next to each other too, so add a little bit of confusion. But yeah, super excited to be here today. I have been working in the clean energy space for about a decade now. I work in energy efficiency and building decarbonization for a company called Vanguard Building Solutions, in which we come into buildings, college campuses, hospitals, and look for ways to make them more efficient. About 70% of US emissions comes from the energy space. So that means the energy we use to drive our cars, to heat our buildings. So there's a huge potential to be more efficient and decarbonize that space. And that's what I love, that's what I do. But today I am here representing another organization called the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, or CLI for short. CLI started in 2013 when a group of friends noticed that there was the first big package of clean energy policy that had been put out there. But there was a gap between folks that are being able to implement and leverage that policy to the real action that was happening on the ground, right? There was a big gap of knowledge in language, in the ability for folks to actually have meaningful impact in the clean energy space. And after workshopping a solution for a few years, the founders started a fellowship program, which runs every year, usually for around 6 months. We're about to end this year's cohort. And the fellowship program is focused on giving early and mid-career professionals or professionals that want to transition into clean energy and climate, to give them the skills, the tools, the network, and the language to be able to talk about climate, implement climate projects, and be successful in the clean energy space. So I'm really excited to talk about a little bit more today. I love talking about energy, and I love what the Salata Institute is doing and having so many folks that are interested in the climate space here today. So yeah, I'll pass it back to you and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you all for the introduction. It's wonderful to hear the range of perspective and experiences. Let's dive into our discussion. So the first question is, many of us are just students and recent graduates, trying to move from climate wellness to real impact. From your perspective, what is the biggest gap between the students learning in the university and where they actually need to work efficiently in climate work?
So the biggest gap between students in the university and
actual industrial work they need to.
so the world outside, also called the real world,
Yes.
The big gap is academia is really very, very, very far from what the real world needs. And that's why a lot of people, after they leave school and they start work, they end up saying, most of what I need to do my job, I learned on the job. So the best way to do it, some universities do this as a co-op or just have a little bit of a work thing going on even while you're in school. That's the best way to bridge that gap. But the real world will bring a lot more to your plate for you to deal with in order to do the thing that you want to do. Whether it's learning how to interact with people or managing finances, managing administrative details of an organization or your own work, or being compliant with the various numbers of laws and regulations that are out there. You may not be thinking or learning too much about all that while you're focusing on, say, decarbonization or energy efficiency or energy conservation or food production. So it tends to be siloed when you are in the academic world, but once you're in the real world, you cannot afford to be siloed anymore. So that, I would say, is the biggest gap. Reality hits you from many different directions, but I'm curious to hear what others here have to say.
Yeah, I would agree also that having things in silos is definitely a challenge when you're in an academic setting. Sometimes when you're preparing to find a career that is something that you're passionate about. I would say also exploring your passions is something that's really important to do in the university setting, but then when you're getting out in the real world, you do have to learn so many skills, and following, your intuition about sustainability and climate action, what you'd like to be involved in, will definitely lead you in the right path. But I think getting that real world practice is super important. At Peaceboat US, we have an internship program at the United Nations Plaza. All of our interns also get a pass to observe conferences at the UN. So I think for me, one of the biggest gaps is the access to learning about these issues. We've had so many interns who have come and seen the incredible collaboration at the UN, multilateral collaboration amongst countries, member states, with governments, with civil society, and different stakeholders. And I think that's something that's really also important, is to get that firsthand experience, seeing how these things work and seeing how you can also implement it in your career yourself. And then I think also cultural exchange and understanding is another key factor with Peaceboat, really seeing how we can work at a more global level. I've obviously known that a lot of students don't all have the chance to study abroad or to travel abroad, but because Peaceboat is an international NGO, by visiting different countries, learning about different solutions for sustainability, and also looking at traditional knowledge and nature-based solutions. I think there's a big gap there that maybe we don't have the experiential learning that we need in universities right now. So we're trying to fill that gap with taking students out in the field and really seeing how things are happening on the ground.
I think these are both great answers. Maybe I'll just add two things. One is there's a reason why, imagine AI right now, right? So for example, with AI, you would not go to Harvard or Stanford, where I come from, to learn the cutting edge of what's happening. It's happening in the big labs. Because the pace at which AI is moving is incredible, and therefore you have to be very practice-oriented. And similarly in climate, the pace at which policy, technology, capital, et cetera, is moving, it's not happening inside academia anymore. It's happening outside. So therefore, step out as much as you can outside the Harvard bubble and the MIT bubble, and interact with others. That's one. I think the second one is not something that I can expect anyone who's right now a student to necessarily have, but this is something which has been a realization, having done this for 20 plus years in my career now, is that there are actually many ways of knowing something. And academia and universities have a very specific way of teaching you how to think about things and so on. Just to give you two examples, I think Emily brought up indigenous ways of thinking about the world, right? Especially in climate. If you look at how indigenous systems have actually thought about biodiversity, about nature and our place in it, it's actually a completely different view altogether from how we learn in the typical Western scientific way of learning. So make space for that in your mind. Be open to that is one example. The other one I would say is systems thinking. You might have read this term, Donella Meadows, just right across the street from you. But the idea that there are all these leverage points in these very complex systems, and we often are taught to act at the lowest levels of influence, not at the highest levels of influence. In a way, the kind of work that a lot of us do here is actually at the highest levels of influence, which is changing mindsets. Very hard to do, but very powerful. And those kinds of things also universities do, but they don't kind of conceptually train you for that. So again, you're just getting started at this journey. This is, for a reason, the most wicked problem that humanity has ever attempted to solve. So to have the humility and the curiosity to reach out as much as you can and learn as much as you can for years and years and years.
You're a bigger man than I am. I was just going to say you can do our course, and that actually gets that practical experience, but you didn't go that way. So no, I think it's great that you have the ability to almost like kiss a lot of frogs until you find your prince in an academic setting, right? You have a base where you can use this learner's mindset and go out into the world, see what kind of industries are out there. And within climate, I think that's really important because you could be really in love with clean energy, right? Like Matthias over here. You could be really in love with farms, for example. And the way that you get that practical experience, can be challenged once you go into the workforce, right? So there's an ability to at least be single, go out there and date, and understand what kind of industry, what type of role, what function that you're really passionate about. So I think that's sort of one part. The second thing I'd say is academia does have a role here, and I think business schools do try this approach where they have that flipped classroom, right, where you're reading a case study before you come into the classroom, and then you're problem solving and getting lots of different perspectives on an industry problem as well. The way that we approach things is trying to condense a lot of the learning, the comprehension piece, but then the application side of things is where you get to understand industry problems from decarbonization. How does the aviation sector decarbonize? What kind of levers can we pull? Who do we need to convince within an organization? And so I think there is some elements you can access from different learning approaches out there. How do you try and bring close that industry lens as much as possible? But I think making sure that you're still able to kiss a lot of frogs. I think that's a great thing that you guys have from your position in academia as well. Back to you, Matthias.
Thank you, Matthias. So, yeah, I love all of those answers because it speaks a lot to my journey, after college. When I graduated, I went to school for electrical engineering. And, when I first got to the field, I had to work on my own projects. I was always like so focused on technology, right? I want to get the technology right, and I want to make sure this project is the best project ever because I'm super excited about energy efficiency and I want it to work. But, until I started to realizing that, there's several different steps after my discipline, right? After the work that I command. Does a project have the best technology, but it also makes financial sense for our customers, for the university that we're going to be working with? Does it have a positive impact in the lives of the people that are going to be touched by the project, right? And when I joined the Sea Life Fellowship program, that was one of my favorite things because the fellowship does recognize that, right? You come into this group with a bunch of other folks that are really interested in climate action and interested in clean energy, but I was the only one that came from the building decarbonization and energy efficiency space. You had folks that were coming in from environmental justice and folks that were coming in from venture capital and finance and working utility companies, and everyone had to get together and work on this problem. And it was really interesting to see like how my solution and the way that I was approaching things may not have been the best solution for someone that was strictly working to improve the energy portfolio for a community, right? Or someone that really wants to invest in a company so that they can, sell it later and make millions of dollars. So it was very interesting, like employing systems thinking, right? It's really the way that things that you're going to start to work on when you're in the field and leave a little bit of the silo learning from university, which gives you the basic knowledge to get out there and do impactful work. But once you started to get out and really implement that systems thinking, you're gonna really see a big difference in really have the ability to make impactful working climate.
Yeah, thank you for your insightful thought. So it seems that there are a long pathway for our students to go through, but it's an exciting journey. So we can move to the question 2. Each of your organization takes a different approach to developing climate leaders, from online learning to fellowships to hands-on community project. What have you found actually helps people build the practical skills and confidence to make an impact? So, for example, like how you and your organization actually actually gives students leadership and practical skills through your process.
Thank you. Good question. At EC Farm, we have a program called Climate Core. It's for young people from 14 to 24 years old. And Sija, you said students. We accept young people even if they're not students. It turns out in our world, there are many people who are not in school and still want to have a future, still want to have a career. So as long as you fit in that age bracket, we accept young people and we pay them to learn what we feel that they should learn. It so happens that when students walk into the farm and we ask them, do you know where your food comes from? And do you know your food waste goes? Don't know. Or if you ask, do you know what source of energy is used for your electricity? Not sure. Do you know how your home is heated in the winter and cooled in the summertime? Not sure. So this is the level of cluelessness that we sort of encourage and harbor in a lot of schools. There's something you're learning inside a school that's towards a job that can maybe get you a car and a condo, but not really understand how we interact with our natural ecosystem and how we live our lives. what energy we depend on, what are we consuming, what is the externality of our lives. We don't really understand. So what we aim to do and have been somewhat successful at doing is get these young people to look for answers for these questions by way of working with us. The city of Boston, for example, has a nice electricity program called Community Choice Electricity. If you want, you can subscribe to it and you can go into 100% green energy option. But if people don't know about it, they won't subscribe to it. Or they may suspect it's like a bad thing or whatever, it's a scam. But these young people learn what these programs are that are available that people can subscribe to, and then go out in the community and work with families to convince them to try and subscribe to those. By doing this, they learn what's available, why that is good, why the current alternative is not good, and why people don't subscribe, and how to talk to them to help them understand. So we can actually move the needle on carbon. They do this, these young people do it, and they practice how to talk to somebody, how to sell something, how to convince somebody, how to be critical in how you question something, and how to get something done. All of this, and there are many, many examples like this that involves going out into the community and maybe doing a coastal resilience project, cutting down phragmites and creating little ways in which the soil erosion can be stopped. Or building a green infrastructure project in a green way so that if stormwater comes, it doesn't result in flooding and stops people from using the asset, but instead the plants grow because of the stormwater and it's nicer and people can continue to use the asset. That is the green way. So they do projects that are very, very beneficial in the here and now. And through those projects, they learn a lot and they bring benefits to their own neighbors, their own families, to themselves. And this makes them feel good and learn, and they get paid to learn this. So this is where we're finding some traction, and I'm happy to give you other examples. I just mentioned a couple of examples.
No, that's great. I love the hands-on experiences, especially getting into nature. And it's true, a lot of students don't know where their food comes from or where the electricity is coming from. And I think that's a general knowledge sharing opportunity in all the institutions that we work in. So for Peace Boat specifically, we use a ship that travels the world. We have conferences and lectures every day on board the ship. It's like a floating university, basically, with spaces like this. And so we have guest speakers coming on the boat and speaking between each country. And as we're visiting around these 20 different countries in one global voyage is 3 months. And so our youth leaders on board get a chance to meet with all of these incredible guest speakers, to work with them, to help them organize lectures. And then we also have a Youth for the SDGs scholarship program. Do you guys know, raise your hand if you know what the SDGs are. Okay, great job, everybody. I'm so proud to see that. So the Sustainable Development Goals is such an important topic. You'd be surprised how many people don't know about them still, and we're supposed to be reaching these goals by 2030. We're so far behind. So our Youth for the SDGs scholarship program is one way that we empower youth to learn about sustainability and also to teach about it. So I was saying we have Karen. Raise your hand, Karen. Karen Torres is here. She was our Youth for the SDGs scholar from Harvard University. She just graduated and joined us on our last training program. On board the ship, we got to go together from Jamaica through the Panama Canal to Costa Rica and Mexico with 13 other youth working on sustainable development. And each of the youth were able to give a peer-to-peer workshop on board. So it's not only the guest speakers giving lectures and spaces like this, the youth as well are taking the stage, presenting, learning how to organize their presentations, but also working as a team. So there's so many skills that they're able to gain. And then also being on stage and sharing their experiences and work with others has been really empowering for them. I think the peer-to-peer learning in the workshops is one of the most important parts of the program, but also learning directly from others and participating in these international exchanges abroad. And then at the United Nations headquarters in New York, which is not on the boat, right? So we also have our office in New York, where we have our internship program. As I mentioned, all of our interns get a pass to the UN. That's pretty empowering and fun as well. Please feel free to talk to Karen Networking about any of those experiences. But they get to go into the UN, they organize events, they get to speak at events as well. Every year, we participate in the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, where they review the SDGs. That's every July. So the students in the summer get to organize their own side events, they're called, where they're organizing events like we're organizing this one alongside the Climate Career Fair tomorrow. So there's lots of opportunities to take the lead and to create spaces for youth. And also, I think that by giving them the opportunity to create ideas that they would like to learn about and talk about, that's really empowering for young people. They don't always want to hear us speaking, but to really take the lead in conversations. So how about Tara Do?
I was just going to say, who wants to be 3 months on a boat in a university with amazing people giving talks to you, learning peer to peer? Who doesn't want to be there? Like, I mean, everyone. Like, this is amazing.
Signing me up.
It's not, yeah,
Let's
exactly.
go. We can have a panel on the boat next time.
Let's have a
I'll
sign-up
offer
sheet there.
our ship.
I'll try to keep my answer short. I think for us at Terra, there are 3 arcs that we try to take you through when you're trying to learn, because that's kind of our model of how people truly learn. One is the intellectual arc, which is very much the stuff that you would expect it to be. But the second one is what we call the emotional arc. And that is just a recognition that climate work is unlike any other work. This is not SaaS, AI, whatever have you, right? This comes from here. And a lot of us actually don't recognize it on day one, that's the reason why we find ourselves coming back to this over and over again. So there is this emotional journey that we take you through, which has this classic, there is this terrifying talk that an ocean scientist gives in week 2, where everyone is here because they already know the scale of the crisis, and then this guy, he just like lays it out thick. And at the end of that, everyone is kind of an emotional wreck. And that's part of the journey, because we want to build you back up from there. And that's an important thing for all of us to learn from our own kind of learning experiences, which is where does the heart resonate? So that's the second thing. And the third thing, we call it the doing arc, which is a lot more focused on everything from how to rewrite your resume for a climate world to how to actually work on projects in which you'll have multiple stakeholders and not just kind of the usual ones, but also the community that you're working with and so on. So that's, I'll let Matthias kind of talk more about, because I think they're amazing at doing this really, really well.
That sounds like I should do your course. The emotional part of it is something we don't cover. How we focus on it is using some of our strengths. So, because we have 2 halves. One half is a climate advisory business where we've done 150 plus projects on net zero and sustainability. And then we sanitize some of those projects and we convert them into what you learn in your modules. We've designed a net zero start to finish approach, starting from setting your climate strategy, your near-term and long-term targets of your emissions, measuring those emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, measuring your product emissions, and getting to the reporting and compliance as the regulators start to tighten their grip on corporations and get them to disclose climate, including the risks, but also the opportunities as well going forward. And then finally, bringing it all together in a decarbonization sort of week, which is, I actually play the role of an airline captain. I think Daniel over here has done the course. I don't know if you remember that, but I impersonate a captain without a pilot license at the beginning of the course, talking about what's going to happen. We're going to be spending 2 hours in the air, focused on a decarbonization. The weather is 73 Fahrenheit, and we're going to land at 2:05 p.m. And then we go into an aviation sector case where you are part of a sustainability team that needs to pitch directly to a CEO about how do you actually be sustainable and how do you build that roadmap. So it's building that climate strategy, and we kind of bully our cohort a little bit. It's a bit hard. They have to whittle down 10 strategies that have been modeled out from both the environmental impact and the financial impact, and they have to whittle that down into the top 3, and they have to tell us why. And there's a pitching competition at the end where they have to actually pitch and prove why they have conviction that these top 3 solutions make sense for the C-suite to be a sustainability leader. And so that's our approach in bringing the industry into, I guess, the learning environment as well, which I think a little less emotional, but people do laugh when I do the impersonation, so I think there's laughter at least. Back to you, Matthias.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience too, because graduating college, I finished my degree in engine engineering. It was at a time where the solar industry was booming. It was, for the first time, solar energy was cheaper than coal, and I feel like there were solar companies, sprouting like mushrooms left and right. To see like new people in the industry, and it was a very exciting time. But where do I go? Like, how do I start? Right? What can I do to leave college and start doing meaningful work? And to me, it was very powerful that I had the direction, some really good mentors that were not only able to help me understand how to get in the industry, but what type of certificate should I be looking at? What type of licenses? Where should I be doing some additional training? Who should I be talking to? Like, which organizations, were the most impactful in the clean energy space? And CLI recognizes that. That's why when you go through the fellowship program, which you do get the training, you get technical training, language training. You learn how to talk about climate, what impactful work around climate means. But after all of that, you're not left behind. You're part of this community of thousands of professionals that are working in the clean energy space that not only are going to be there to help you find the right mentorship, to help you understand what are some of the challenges you're going to face when you're working around the clean energy, but also going to give you emotional support when legislation that improved clean energy, pushed clean energy forward many years was rolled back, and now we're all wondering like what's going to happen next, right? I mean, there's a lot of that, having that community, being a place where you can make friends that also like climate and care about climate and care about climate work. So yeah, when it comes to having that building that confidence and building the practical skills, having a network. And if you're not into clean energy, there might be other spaces, right? I mean, if you are into clean energy, apply for the fellowship program because that's a great place to help you get into the industry. But yeah, mentorship, networking, it's going to be a huge help into helping you build the skills and also the confidence to be successful in the climate space. Back
Yeah,
to you,
thank you
Sitja.
very much. It's very wonderful. I love hearing how this model translates ideas into action. And then we can move to our last question. So each of you works in a different part of climate ecosystem, from technology and education to community and policy. Looking across your work, what do you see as the next biggest challenge or opportunity that the climate field need to tackle in the next 5 years or 10 years?
I'll name a couple. One, anybody here heard of the concept called climate justice? Yeah, that's a good number of hands. The people who have contributed the least to climate change, who probably currently have the least say in what can be done about it, are experiencing the most amount of damage, more frequent and as well as more intense. And this is not confined to today's people alive today. The people who will be alive in the future, who definitely haven't contributed anything to climate change, will also suffer a whole lot more than we're all suffering. So the idea of climate justice isn't understood that well or acted on that well at all. That's why when I started talking about students, I said the young people that come to us aren't always students. It's whoever happens to be in that age, whether or not they're in school, because not everyone has the privilege to even be in school, for example. So how are the underprivileged, how are the ones that are wronged by the actions of others are being taken care of? That is where I think the biggest challenge is. At the same time, it is also the best strategy, because if any of us is vulnerable, all of us are vulnerable. We learned that during COVID. So if you want to pay attention and do the right thing, stretch the dollar, you would spend it on the most vulnerable and lift them up, or empower them to lift themselves up, so that the rest of us who are not as vulnerable can begin to work on ourselves or support each other. So that's, I would say, number one. The concept of climate justice, which is currently climate injustice and is ongoing. And in this current federal administration's climate, it's even getting worse. So that's one. The second one I would say is our big attraction to technology, including AI. Not paying full attention to where the energy is coming from to power that, for example. To say that AI is going to solve problems and completely hook, line, and sinker believing that and going into that full force without questioning critically, what is this going to do that Do we not know what to do for climate change? Does AI have to tell us? What do you think? No. So we know what we need to do, and we're just not doing it. But there is a big attraction to technology that a few people can benefit from, and the ongoing inequities in wealth and income, all of that has been a problem in causing climate change and making it worse. So this is just more along those lines when we fall for technology in that sense. Technology can be good if we use it as a tool and a power and a tool for good, but there is a way it can be perverted. I would say that is the second challenge.
Can I build on that? Because I do also think that, you know, everywhere we go right now, people are talking about AI, right? It's class work in the news with friends, you know, artificial intelligence out there. And just to build on that is that to have artificial intelligence, to have all those tools and those apps, you have to build all of those data centers, and they use a lot of resource. They use a lot of energy. They use a lot of water, and if companies are left to take their own approach to how are they going to generate enough energy to power those data centers, they're going to be looking at their bottom line and try to find what's the cheapest option. And still, in many cases, going with fossil fuel or other, you know, traditional forms of energy can be the easiest and cheapest way to power those data centers. And, you know, of course, we want to continue to advance the technology, right? I mean, there is a lot of good that can come out of it. There is a lot of, you know, challenges around it too. But I think I mentioned early on, right? The energy space accounts for about 70% of all of the carbon emissions in the United States. We're expecting with artificial intelligence to have the biggest increase in energy demand in history, in some cases even more than what we've seen when air conditioners became a thing, and that was a massive increase in demand too. So if we don't stop right now and start looking for ways to find out new technologies that can, and new solutions to power those data centers, but also better ways to use the stuff that we already have, like solar, wind, energy storage, grid flexibility technology. There's like so much that we already been doing for so many years that we know that works, but it just takes that little bit of effort from, you know, frankly, everyone in this room to, as we starting working on your projects and solutions, to be able to continue to advance the technology, but to do so responsibly. So I just want to add to that because I completely agree that, you know, it's going to be a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities in that space.
Yes, thank you. Could rest of our speakers just share 1 minute's ideas? Is that okay? Yeah, please feel free to share it.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in. We're gonna go quickly.
Everyone, 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. 1 minute, guys. 1 minute each. So I was just gonna say that for us, one of the biggest challenges and opportunities is the blue economy. And when we're thinking about, you know, the greening of the economy, renewable energy, and all these incredible opportunities, there's also the ocean economy and coastal economy, and that's a huge topic. So I hope that, yeah, Salata Institute and Harvard in general can be a leader in that space as well, because it is really important. You said for the next 5 years, right? And I think our ocean is in, you know, dire threat from plastic pollution, overfishing, contamination, and climate change, increasing sea level rise. But it's also an opportunity for us to really go back and work on conservation. The Earthshot Prize was just won by one of our partners at the High Seas Alliance to protect marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ Treaty. So really excited about the opportunities of the blue economy and what we can do together.
Maybe if I'll just say something provocative in that 1 minute that I have, which is around
Exciting.
around AI, which is I think it is, whether we like it or not, a world-changing phenomena happening in front of our eyes right now. Second, we're not winning in climate right now; we're losing, right? So therefore, strategies have to change. And I actually think that there is in the what to do with AI, the climate movement has actually left that game altogether. We are sitting outside of it right now and saying, look, there's no point in engaging with AI because it's too resource intensive, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's not the way we win this. The way we win this is by actually democratizing AI in the hands of people like Emily and the people that she works with, and people like Kanan and the people they work with. That's the direction that I want to take our own company, which is, can we get AI in the hands of everyone who wants to work in climate and get them to do what they do 10x, 100x better? An example would be that in our current cohort, there's a guy who's in the Ministry of Environment in Ghana, and he's supposed to come up with a coastal resilience plan for the whole country. He's inundated by 1,000 documents of all different kinds, and there's no way he's going to hire a McKinsey to be able to do that, or even an OPF for that matter, right?
Yeah, that'd be tough. We just use AI. Yeah.
But we are actually building a cadre of very climate conscious people who know the AI tools to go work with this person in the ministry and actually make this happen. That's a kind of leaning forward that I think we need to do at this point in time. Otherwise, we're kind of missing the bus altogether.
Cool. I feel like getting drawn into this AI discussion. I guess I would just say oil and gas companies are using AI to drill more. So I think there's a challenge here where climate people, if we're waiting on the sidelines and not engaging, then that's a challenge, which leads to my second point. Climate jobs working in sustainability doesn't necessarily need to be labeled as a sustainability job. You can go into the heart of Chevron and persuade, negotiate, and affect change from within. And so I think the final takeaway, I think when I think about 5 years from now to 2030, we just need you in the audience. We need more people to join. It doesn't have to look like I'm a sustainability, chief sustainability officer or a sustainability manager. It can be I work in finance and I also integrate sustainability and climate into the work that I do, right? And so that I think would be my final takeaway is we have a huge supply gap in talent. We're not going to reach our 2050 goals without the 14 million energy jobs that we need to address. We're not going to do that without using as many technological tools. And I'll say tools. We need to be intentional how we use them. But there's a gap for 2050. It requires a lot of people to mobilize in lots of different forms. So that's for your takeaway to think about how you can do that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences and inspiration. So what we heard today is that empowering climate leaders is more about connection, creativity, and courage instead of only knowledge. So let's give one round of applause to our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to move right into our next session, which is our keynote. So our keynote speaker today will share insights on how to navigate and thrive in the evolving climate and sustainability job market. So please welcome Leonard Adler, who is a Harvard Kennedy School alumnus and founder and CEO of the Green Jobs Network. Leonard.
Great. So before I get started, I want to thank Leslie for the kind invitation to be here with you, and thank everyone that's behind the scenes putting this event together. As you all know, this is the kickoff to 2 days. We've got a full day today, got the Expo tomorrow, so a lot of people behind the scenes making that happen. So just want to acknowledge everyone who's working on this. And then I want to thank everyone here, and in case anyone's watching online, taking the time out. Things are really busy, so again, appreciate your interest and attention. So mentioned, my name is Leonard Adler, founder of Green Jobs Network, a graduate of the Kennedy School, so definitely excited to be back here on campus. So we have a lot to cover, and I have about 30 minutes, and so there's a chance I might not get to everything, so I want to mention a few things. One is you'll be able to find me both later tonight at the networking reception, and tomorrow I'll have a booth at the Expo. So if you have questions, we won't have time for questions today, but if you really have a question, and then my contact info will be shared as well on that front. Also, the slides, we've got a lot of material to go through. That'll also be available afterwards. So kind of just stretch, take a breath, because we've got a lot of things we're going to try to cover in 30 minutes, make the most of our time together. So we're going to cover 4 things in this session. So we're going to provide kind of a foundation for what we're going to talk about. And then really the goal here is to give you practical tips for your job search. There was a lot of great advice given in the last session. There's actually someone mentioned, I think at the very end, about the blue economy. Green Jobs Network just last week launched another job site at blueeconomyjobs.org. So there's going to be a lot of very practical resources for you, which is really the goal of this session. And then a common question that I get is, how can I get an edge? Right, the job market can be pretty tough. And so that's what part 3 is about, kind of putting this notion of the entrepreneurial edge as you think about your career. And then there's really a closing comment or two about the sustainability of the self. So we're going to jump in. So as I mentioned, there's 2 primary goals. We're going to give you practical tips for your job search, and then also themes to keep in mind, whether you're actively looking today or for your job search 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, or when you come back to campus and many years later. Hopefully some themes, maybe 1 or 2 will stick with you. And as I mentioned, pretty much I'm going to go through a lot of resources. You can find them all on the Climate Career Hub, which is on climatechangejobs.com, one of the Green Jobs Network websites. So this is in the foundations. Think of it as an overview section. We're going to cover a lot of the themes, but before jumping in, just want to have a brief kind of definition, just to be transparent about what my definition is. And in this presentation, I'm going to use green jobs, climate jobs interchangeably. There's sustainability jobs, a lot of terms that are used. So I just want to be transparent with what my definition is, which is what's on the slide, which is full-time or part-time opportunities that provide a positive social or environmental benefit. And social is in there with intention, as I'll explain in a moment. And these can be in a variety of fields in any sector of the economy. So just to give you a sense, I've been doing this work for a long time. You can go to different places and there's going to be different definitions, right? A government body may have a definition, a different organization may have one. So these are just to give you examples of, there are a lot of definitions out there, whether you're talking about the clean economy, climate tech, green, climate jobs, and so forth, right? This is from the UK, just did a national green climate energy jobs report. This is an example of one of their the definition. So I have this on the slide, again, mentioned with intention. So all those are part of, to me, when you're thinking obviously about the environment and climate, but to me, social impact is the lens that I look at the world, and in terms of really trying to help people find jobs that match their values. So a tangible way to illustrate that is with fair trade. So if you go to the supermarket and you get a little bag of coffee, look at see the fair trade insignia, what is fair trade about? Certainly there can be some positive environmental impacts about fair trade, but at its heart, fair trade is about people. Are they being paid fairly for what they produce? So that's part of my broader definition of green, again, just to explain that. So now we're going to go through 3 themes, and then we'll be moving on to the job search tips. So the first theme is that there's many pathways to impact. And I include this in the session at the beginning for a few reasons. I'd say the most important one is to help you take some of the pressure off yourself if you're doing a job search. You may feel like unless you get the perfect opportunity or do this exact thing, you're not going to be a success or you're not going to have an impact. And I'm here to tell you, after kind of working for a while, that there's many pathways to make an impact. And I'm going to use myself as the case study to illustrate this. So I'm going to go through this quickly because this is about a couple decades of work in about 2 minutes. Right? So these are different sectors that I've worked in. So I've worked in, you can think of the first one as kind of anti-poverty, but human needs and economic opportunity. I've worked in law and justice. I've worked in sustainable business, health and wellness, and green and climate. So just to give you examples, initially, I think what's important and again, I'll be transparent about this, but for you to think about as well as you pursue your job search is your why, right? You may see that in an interview. An employer may ask you, why are you interested in this, right? And so I'm putting out what my why is. I grew up in a poor family in New York. We were a single-parent household on sick. There were 6 of us, and because this is also timely with the news, we were on food stamps. And so I was fortunate enough to make it to Stanford for my undergrad. When I was at school, began to take some classes that touched upon issues that I had lived, growing up. And I thought it'd be amazing if I could use this amazing opportunity to do something to help prevent other people from experiencing what my family did. So that was really the seeds kind of my career DNA, and that's what brought me to the Kennedy School and some things beyond that. So I summarized that really in terms of my why, as I tried to turn my pain of my early years into something positive in terms of making a difference. And so again, I'd encourage you to think about your own why in terms of what we're doing. So to give you examples now of these sectors I talked about, we're going to look at some of the work I've done in these different sectors. Thought I'd include this given where we are talking today. When I was at the Kennedy School, myself and the other students, we just did some practical things when we were students. We did food drives. We did cold weather clothing drives to help what we saw were immediate needs around us. There are things I did as I continued my career. So at Georgetown, I co-founded the first law review that focused on poverty issues. After law school, I got a fellowship. There was a lot of discussion of fellowships. I got a social entrepreneurship fellowship from Echoing Green. I did a number of things, anti-poverty stuff, made the news, also did things that involve helping people get food and raising awareness of some challenges that people are facing. So that's in the area of anti-poverty, that's one sector. I also have done work after the Kennedy School. I got a degree from Georgetown Law School. So I've done things in law and justice. So one example is a nonprofit called Equal Justice Works. What they do is they help law students. So if you're a law student, say, and I want to use my legal education to make an impact positively, I worked for a group that really helped supported those students to give them education, training, and career support. There's other things I've done with my law degree. Part of that has been to make legal information accessible to the public for free. So if you want to look up a Supreme Court case, if you want to understand your rights in plain English, if you want to find a lawyer, I've had an opportunity to work for leading legal websites, and I still do this today. These are some of the ones I've worked for that basically empower people with access to the law. Separate, you may have heard an organization called Net Impact. They try to help leverage the power of business for positive, social impact. I had a chance to work for them for a while. Done a few things in health and wellness, doing some things relating to trying to create more trauma-informed workplaces. I have a passion for running, and I've done some things in the running space. Again, we won't go into that today, because the reason we're here is for the last of these sectors that I've worked in, which is green and climate jobs. So I've been doing this for a long time. It may be hard to see, but this was way back 2009. So I've seen a lot in the space. Green Jobs Network provides a lot of free resources for people who are looking for jobs, job boards, organized career fairs. Mention that. Nowadays, you have to have podcasts. We've got podcasts as well. So that's the first of the themes. So that hopefully from that, get a little bit of a takeaway. You can work in a lot of different sectors and make an impact to take the pressure off yourself. The second theme in terms of looking for work in the space is to hold two concepts together. One is to be realistic, yet also to be optimistic. So the reality check, I'm pretty sure I don't need to actually tell you what the state of the job market is, right? So I'm just going to say I'm aware of it. When I started Green Jobs Network, it's the Great Recession, 2008. Also a very challenging time. This is a very, very challenging time. So again, the reality check is really important, right? So at the same time, I think it's important to think of a few things to be optimistic. And so we're going to cover those in a moment. So on the slide, as you can see, it talks about, and this is pretty recent, the trends that we're in the middle of, they are unstoppable. So from a job seeker standpoint, I do think it's smart. If you're part of a macro growing trend, there's value in that. And I'll give you, again, some specifics. So as compared to saying it's macro growing trends, let's look at that's something. So when I first started Green Jobs Network, you pretty much could not buy an electric vehicle. And now, as I mentioned, I've been working in this space for a while. That's what we see today, millions of vehicles. And behind each of those vehicles are people with jobs all along the way. And if you're to look at what's the next 15 years going to look like, is that number going to go down or go up? I think we all know the answer. These are macro growing trends. Let's take a look at something else really quickly. Clean energy, right? And again, there's a lot of data on the slide. The main point is really the headline, which is last year, the amount of new energy that came online, half was from solar, right? And so 15 years ago, that was not the case. And if we look into the future, is there going to be more solar energy? Is there going to be more renewable energy than today? I think we know the answer to that is yes. So again, you're part of a macro growing trend. And I like including these in here just because I find it inspiring. So there's a website where you can look at the real-time energy mix from utilities across the country, or the grid. So in California, this is the California Independent System Operator. So this was from a couple weeks ago. At that time of day that I'm highlighting there on the chart, you'll see more than 70% of the energy to California, which is like bigger than many a country, was from solar energy. And that was not the case, obviously, years ago. And then in the evening now, batteries. You'll see the amount of energy coming from batteries is growing. So again, as we look into the future, these are trends that are going to continue to grow. And again, with these trends growing, there's employment behind the scene. And then in terms of Massachusetts, again, just some quick data point or two, there has been growth, obviously, in these fields, and there's more projected growth to come. So that's hopefully to give you a little bit of optimism. Then the last of the themes is that there's a place for you in the space. So a couple of things just to illustrate that. So big picture, as you might guess, there are jobs all across the country in green and climate. We won't look at that in great detail. The thing that's more important, I think, for what we're going to be talking about here is in occupation diversity in these fields. So it's not like you only can be an engineer or you only are a solar installer. There's lots of things out there, regardless of your interest, your passion, your skill set. So this is one illustration of that. This is from, again, that UK report. So they're looking at this nationally, projecting out to 2030, which types of roles, what occupations will be in demand. And the key takeaway from this is that it's not just one field. So again, it's not just installers, it's not just scientists, there's a diversity. So if you finance, law, marketing, so there is needs for all of those skills as part of this movement. And again, this is, again, bringing it back to Massachusetts, same thing here. And then if you want to see stories to understand that there's a place for you to see real stories, you're getting a chance to hear these stories throughout the day. But also there's things online, there's websites you can go to where they actually have profiles of these stories. And again, as was mentioned in the last panel, you're needed, right? I mean, there's never been a more important time to have talent come into this field. And just to give you examples of this, I have on this, these are 2 job fairs that just took place again in California, but in the past week or 2. So you are needed in this space and there's a place for you. Okay, so we're gonna now move on to some nuts and bolts talking about job search tips. So the first thing I wanna set up as a framework for you to think about is which place you're in. And you can be in both of these places at different times of the day or different days of the week, but are you exploring or are you searching, right? And by exploring, I mean you don't really know yet what you want, and you're going through a discovery process to figure that out. Versus searching, you're like, I know what I want, I just got to figure out how to get it. So we're going to just briefly talk about exploring, and then we're going to go much more into the searching part. So in terms of exploring, I would kind of pose some of these as things to think about. And again, this session is not meant to be a full career development session, but just a few things you can think about if you are in an exploration phase. What sector or issue are you interested in working in? What type of job function or role within an organization do you want to do? And that for another one is what's the daily work, right? Do you get a lot of energy if you are interacting with people? Are you happy if you have a chance just to work with information? Right? What's the environment that's also bringing you energy and ideally joy as well, if it's possible, right? Do you like to be outside? Are you thrilled if you can work at a desk with headphones on all day? Small organization, big one. These are all different kinds of things you can explore. And again, as was mentioned in the last session, if you are in school, this is a great time to do that as well. And so just really a couple quick tips on that. Obviously, do your homework. Tap into resources at your school. I know this is both a Harvard MIT event. There are a lot of amazing resources, events and communities. It's really important to experiment. If you're exploring, it shouldn't just be an intellectual exercise. Do things. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then probably the most important thing to think about on this is the last point, which is you might be doing things, trying things out, going to events, but to make sure you take time, right, and listen to your intuition. Because a lot of things in our society now really try to almost numb us out or make it where we can't listen to our intuition. So as much as possible, try to listen to that voice as you are doing that exploration process and find out what your truth is. And then these are just some illustrations. There's so many things happening on both MIT and Harvard campus. There's a lot. If you're exploring, I'd say go for it and tap into all of these things. And I'm an alum, a member of HACE. And so again, if you need to connect up with alumni, the alumni are here as well for you. Other than mentioning, there's lots of events. These are just some quick illustrations if you're curious about food systems. This is a free session. Examples of conferences. If you're passionate about green building, there's conferences and things like that. There's lots of communities you can join. This is one example. If you are interested in the creative arts, this is another community, sustainability creative. So there's a lot of different ways to explore. But we're going to move now on to searching. So I'm going to talk about really 2 kind of big headings, and then we're going to dive deep a bit. So one, we're going to just talk about job boards, probably not going to be too much breaking news. And then we're going to go into what I describe as the hidden job market. So first with job boards, the point about this is to also think like an employer. When we're searching for jobs, a lot of times we're thinking about, well, we're looking for a job. Try to think of it from the employer standpoint in different ways in the process. So one is, where might they post the job? Where might they circulate it? One is they might just post it on one of these wide job boards, Indeed as an example. Why? Because they might want to get a lot of applications, for example, right? So if you do go to a place like Indeed and other of these horizontal job boards and you do searches, you will find opportunities. This is an example of one here in Boston. Right, but more specifically for our space, there's some unique things that we can tap into. And so there's a few different types of job boards I would put out there. One is what I would describe as broad-based, green or climate job boards that cover really the whole sector. And then others that cover kind of a niche or a slice of it, and then things that overlap with green and climate. And so we're going to take a look at these. And Green Jobs Network has a list of all these, so again, you don't have to copy them all down. So as an example, mentioned, Green Jobs Network has a job board at climatechange.jobs.com, thousands of jobs. You can look really across different sectors. But if you told me, I really am passionate about water, right, the topic, again, blue economy was just mentioned, well, guess what? There's a site called Josh's Water Jobs that just has jobs in this space. You said, actually, I've done some exploring. What I really am interested in is impact investing. Well, guess what? There's a job board that just has jobs on impact investing. So you see this throughout the green and climate space. There are niche and specialized sites that's all they do. So if that's your interest, definitely make sure you tap into those. And things that overlap with green and climate, if we think of the nonprofit sector, clearly not every nonprofit job is a green climate job, but clearly some of them are. So a leading site like Idealist, which has lots of these opportunities, would be one I would encourage to keep on your kind of resource list. So now the rest of what we're going to talk about in the terms of these tips in this section is what I call the hidden job market. And to explain what I mean by that, you can imagine, jobs on job boards, in my view, that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit. An employer has taken the time and expense to post it, but not every employer is going to do that. It could be for financial reasons. It could be they're not in the staff capacity. So then the question is, how can we find some of these? So the first is to go direct, right? So the employer on a job board, they posted it so you could find it. Now go the other way and kind of make a list and say, who would I most want to work for? And then go really kind of monitor their career sites, see what's happening. And if they've got a job, then obviously go and proceed with applying. So to give you a specific example, again, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, a place I've been to, and I always have fun when I go. There's the Monterey Bay Aquarium, right? And so I don't know if they post jobs on job boards, but I looked at jobs the other day, right? So this is a job from the past week, a pretty cool job opportunity. So same idea, if there's things that you're interested, jobs, employers are interested in, is to go direct to them. Don't wait for them to post it on a job board. Another example right here in the city of Boston. This is a pretty cool job. This is a live active job as another example. Don't know if it's on a job board, but it's sitting there for you to discover it. Then the second one are job newsletters and email lists. What's fun about this is that basically organizations will simply email you jobs. You don't have to do any work. That's not too bad. So to give you some examples of that, Tufts runs an email list specifically for jobs in food systems. There's jobs posted pretty much every day. You can subscribe, and everything I'm showing you here is free. This is an excerpt from an organization called Diversity and Sustainability. They'll curate a lot of jobs and send those out. And then Green Jobs Network publishes a newsletter, normally has about 250 jobs in each issue, remote ones and local ones. Okay, so the next one, and we're probably going to spend the most time in this section talking about this, because I think it's really an unappreciated asset in terms of tools for your job search, and that's LinkedIn. There's really 2 points we're going to cover here. So the first is really transforming your feed, right? We all, at times we feel like the feeds are just coming to us, is to be strategic about using your feed on LinkedIn to turn into a jobs feed for you, right? And then the other part here is to have LinkedIn send you jobs, which is also good. And everything I'm going to talk about right now is all free to do. So to highlight kind of what ideally the goal would be of what I'm going to talk about is to turning your feed into a climate job feed. So these are two examples of things that I saw in my feed. And if I were to open my computer right now and look at my LinkedIn feed, I'd say at least half, if not more, of the posts I'd be seeing, they're all just jobs, right? So these are two examples of organizations. Now, I don't know if these were ever posted on a job board, but I saw this post in my feed that told me they were hiring. That's one example. This is another example, right? So this is someone who works at this, it's a national organization. We're hiring multiple jobs. Another thing I saw in my feed. So these are examples of things that we want to get in your feed, and I'm going to show you a little bit how to do that. So first is to think about the power of your first degree connections. Think about who are you first degree connected to, right? So in this case, I'm connected to a recruiter. Not a surprise, the recruiter is going to be posting jobs into the feed. So that's one example. And another example, so this is someone else I have in my feed, and she runs something called Reconsidered. So this is a first degree connection, and she reposted something. This is a pretty cool job at Apple. The person that actually posted it is not a first degree connection, but it ended up in my feed because a first degree connection reposted it. Another example, a first degree connection liked it. All they did was like a post, and now this job, over working for the T, ended up in my feed. So being strategic and thinking about who you are connected to on LinkedIn and adding other people to that, their activity on LinkedIn becomes, with the algorithm, what's in your feed. And so one of the things that Green Jobs Network is going to do is probably to try to create something to kind of help kickstart. So if you were like, well, who do I follow on there to get started? Think coming soon we'll have some more ways to help you on that. A couple of other things there are in groups. It's free to join groups. There are groups on LinkedIn where people who are working at an organization will post a job. I'm hiring. Do you know anybody? Send someone my way. So these are examples. And Green Jobs Network runs a group. People post jobs all the time. The group has about 140,000 people in it. So the specific homework for you would be these three things: connect and follow people, and like that. Follow organization pages, like that National Wildlife. If you follow them, that post about the hiring will show up in your feed. And then join groups. The last part here about LinkedIn is to leverage the power of their job alerts. Any search that you do on their job section, any search you do, you can turn it into an alert. And you can set up dozens and dozens and dozens of alerts. So you can curate that by, specifically for an organization, for a keyword, for a location. salary, all kinds of things. Job alerts are great and they're free to do. The last thing in this section, in terms of trying to uncover opportunities in the hidden green job market, is what I call follow the money, right? So if you ask me, where is there a job going to be in 6 months from now or a year from now? If you ask me that question, what I would say is, if you follow the money, find out where the money's going today, that's where the job's going to be tomorrow. So then the trick for us as job seekers would be, all right, well, how do we figure out where the money's going? So that's what we're going to take a look at. So the first, I'm going to give a shout out to this resource because it's a really good one. They're at CTVC, think climatetechvc.co. So it's part of something called Sightline Climate. They're not the only one, but they're definitely, it's a really good one. It's free to subscribe to the newsletter. So every week in their newsletter, they have something like I just showed you. This is the most recent one. They will have in their newsletter who got funding, right? So this is an example. Follow the money. You now have a list of companies who've got funding. And so how does that play out when it comes to job searching? Kind of give an illustration here. So this is a pretty large amount of money, $400 million. And this was about a year or so ago. And so this company, I believe, is actually headquartered here in the Boston area. They do batteries. So Form Energy, they announced this funding. So the day that announcement comes out, they might not have a lot of jobs, potentially, depending on where they are. But if you keep an eye on what they're doing, right, this was an announcement. Their batteries are now coming online this week. So if you go today to their career section, you will see jobs. So kind of taking us back, we saw funding, we look in the future, we see jobs. That's the idea about follow the money. So then the last kind of major section we're going to talk about here is what I call the entrepreneurial edge. Okay? And so there's really two key points, here. And so the first one is that specifically entrepreneurship. So whether you start something, like I started Green Jobs Network, created my own opportunity here. Whether you create your own thing or join a startup, entrepreneurship can definitely be one path to getting a job in the space. But I would say probably more important is the second bullet, which we're going to talk about as well, which is really to have an entrepreneurial mindset. You don't necessarily need to go be a founder, but to have an entrepreneurial mindset as you go through your career. And so we're going to talk about both of these. So the first one, again, startups, entrepreneurship can certainly be an active source for jobs, right? So then let's say you wanted to join a startup. The question would be then, how do we find these startups? So similar to what when we were following the money, there's a few points to highlight here. So one, there's a job board out there that they only have startup jobs, and they're called WellFound. They cover the whole startup ecosystem, but they certainly include climate opportunities there as well. And that same resource I mentioned, CTVC, you can use that not only kind of week to week, but then they'll also do roll-ups, right? So for example, here, they actually will highlight which ones got the most funding over a time period. So if you're like, which ones are the largest ones, they might be kind of in the best financial position, which startups, that again is a good resource. There's other significant things to highlight as well, and that is involving both investors, incubators, and accelerators. If you're like, where are the startups, right? So if you can identify these investors, these accelerators, just like job boards, they're dedicated ones for green and climate. One of these, and again, they have kind of a headquarters here in the Boston area, is Greentown Labs. They're the largest in the country. So if you're like, I want to work for a green climate startup, go to their website. They'll actually show you who the startups are that are in their incubator. You now suddenly have a list of potential places to do research on and potentially apply it. One cool thing that's in our space is that some of these funders, some of these accelerators have done something that's making our job as job seekers a lot easier. And that's what this is. So imagine instead of having to go through 94 different company career pages, you could just go to one place and search across the entire set of portfolio companies they have. So nowadays, what I'm seeing more and more as these investors and accelerators to kind of help connect the talent to the startups, they're creating what I call portfolio job boards. So here in one place, we now can search basically 100 startups, more than 1,000 jobs in one place. So links to these portfolio job boards, we have them on Green Jobs Network. So following the startups, definitely key. Mentioning creating your own job as another pathway. And again, there are a lot of resources. I'm not going to go into all that right now, but just to give you one illustration, there are prizes, there are fellowships, there are business plan competitions. So if you have an idea, to take that from idea to at least early stage, or maybe from early stage to getting some more traction. So there are a lot of these opportunities. And now we're going to move. So before I was talking about getting jobs kind of at startups or creating your own, kind of the last couple slides here, I want to just talk about just having that entrepreneurial mindset, right, as you go through your job search. So one part of that is what is your professional presence? So the same way a startup might have to think about how do we brand ourselves, how do we stand out in the market, I'd encourage you to think about that for yourself, right? What is your personal brand, or at least on something like LinkedIn, which many, many employers are going to look at if you apply for a job, just what does that look like? Again, it's free to create your profile. So really take control over that and make it something where you're proud of, and really make yourself shine, and also position yourself so when someone's looking and quickly scanning it, it delivers the message the same way when you go to a website, quickly, there's only a few seconds to kind of get that brand messaging across. That's one example. I think one thing too, let's say we have a lot of different interests, and I think nowadays we all have multiple things we're interested in. Mentioned, so I also do work in the running space. I can't really completely put this on my LinkedIn profile, it just doesn't work because I'm professionally, Green Jobs Network is kind of the main thing I do. So this is an example of something separate that I do, and for those that are eagle eyes, that's actually Boylston Street. So this is a separate website that I have that focuses just on my coaching business. Right? And so people will come to that and contact me, oh, they want to hire me as a running coach. Totally different, but I was intentional about creating a separate kind of brand, and I get to control, okay, put some certifications, things like that. So again, think about your own professional presence. Then the last couple things I want to mention, and I'd say, in terms of leaving you with a last thought or two, this is probably one of the most important ones, is if you are trying to be entrepreneurial in your career, make sure you're doing things. The same way entrepreneurship is an active activity, I would suggest that you think about your career in the same way, which is to do things, experiment. An example, if you said, I've been a lawyer and I've been doing certain kind of legal work and I want to move into climate, what do I do? This is an example. You can volunteer using a site like Green Pro Bono. They'll match you up to places that actually need your work, and you can begin to take those first steps to make that shift. So whatever kind of taking action looks like to you, it's really important to do things. And I'll give you an kind of, again, use myself as a case study in terms of what are the benefits of taking action. And so there's a number of them. If we think about, again, from the career job search standpoint, the first benefit of the value of taking action is it provides evidence of your abilities. It's one thing to say you're passionate about something. Generally in the hiring process, employers want to know what you can do. They want to know, can you do this job, right? So being able to do something, even if it's a side project or volunteer, whatever that looks like to you, it gives evidence that you can then show, or a story you can tell. It obviously can help you build your own skills and capabilities, can expand your network, and it certainly can give you things as part of an exploration process. So a quick example, when AI was coming out, I was like, I didn't know anything about it. How can I use AI to help the community that I serve in terms of job seekers? So I built this site called climatejobs.ai. There's a free climate career coach. You can get your resume, cover letter worked on. So I built that side project, and it wasn't necessarily a moneymaker, but I learned some things and I did it. And then I saw this job posting. So this is a job posting at Anthropic. And if you look at that job posting, social impact partnership lead, I'd have you think about it if you were an employer at Anthropic. If I hadn't have done that, right, versus if I did do that, when am I more competitive? By being able to show them that I actually launched this AI site certainly would make me a more competitive candidate, rather than saying, I believe AI can be helpful in social impact, right? So same thing as you think about your own job search. And now we have the conclusion, which is good because I have about 1 minute left. All right, so the last section here is what I call sustainability of the self. And there's two things we're gonna briefly talk about here. So the first is that your own health and well-being matters, right? So I think we're generally all here because we care about the world, but I would put out there that each of us deserves care as well, right? As we know, the job search, as well as working in climate, can be very, very challenging in a lot of ways. And the most important resource as you're engaging in your job search is you, right? And so the thing I would have you think about is imagine prioritizing your own health and well-being as an integral part of the job search process, not something that takes away from it. Like, oh, I don't have time to get that workout in. I don't have time to, eat healthy or whatever. I don't have time because it's going to take away. I got to get out more resumes. Think about it differently. Think about that investing in your own health and wellness will help you be more successful in your search, right? So today, for example, I made sure I got my run in this morning before coming over here. And so to wrap things up here, again, the way I would have you think about it, since we're talking a lot about sustainability, is the sustainability of the self, right? And health and well-being can include a lot of different things, physical health, mental health, emotional, financial. So it can mean something potentially different to each of us. And so regardless of what it looks like, what I would encourage you to do is simply prioritize it, whatever it means to you, right? Be practical, make a few things that you think you can accomplish, and then do them. And I would put out there that collectively, the healthier we all are, kind of the healthier we'll be able to help make the planet. So with that, I thank you very much.
All right, so our next panel explores how data, design, and decision making come together to build climate resilience. And I'm excited to announce our moderator, who is Mariah Kempson, who is a master in urban planning candidate at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and she will introduce the panelists. So thank you very much.
Hello. Can everyone second? Thank you all for being here. So for our panel today, we have Stephanie Gagnon, the president of the Climate Risk Institute. We have Tappan Parker, who is the outreach and engagement lead at the World Resources Institute. We have Benjamin Modisau, who is the Senior Climate and Coastal Resilience Infrastructure Delivery Project Manager at the City of Boston Planning Department. And we have Fernando Yu, the Director of Economics at Aretian and Urban Analytics and Design. So thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you about data and implementation. So just to start off, could you please share a little bit about your organizations, the approach you take to climate and urban resilience in the work that you do, as well as maybe a little bit about a project that you are currently working on? I'll pass this. Oh, there we go. Sure. Okay.
Hi, everybody. There we go. All right. Evening, everyone. So, as we said, I'm with Climate Risk Institute, and we are a national not-for-profit organization based in Canada and working globally. So our approach to the work that we do is really focused on climate adaptation. We advance climate resilience through developing best practices and making sure that professionals have the capacity and learning to understand how to move forward with adaptation work. We do that through really two streams, and we really focus on the decision point where we can effect change. So working back from that point, we identify best practices through things like risk and analytics and assessments. Those could be things like large-scale country, state level, or province level risk assessments. It can be risk and return on investment, flooding mapping, or it could be options analysis for coastlines. Those are some of the projects we're doing right now. The second stream that we work on is in capacity building, and again, it has multiple pathways. The first is an infrastructure resilience professional designation for professional engineers. So that's a whole stream of courses that you do the work, and then you demonstrate your competency in that area to gain a designation. We also have a wide variety of courses that are tied into Royal Roads University and provide micro-credentials for professionals across the spectrum. So we don't focus on any one area. We focus on all the professions: planning, landscape architects, accountants, asset managers, you name it. So courses and micro-credentials available to you. But then once the training's there, you gotta make sure they actually support professionals in the ongoing learning. Climate world is full of new information, new data, new tools that are coming rapidly. And so we build communities of practice. The biggest one that we're working on right now is an online, actually AI-enabled community of practice that enables peers to learn from each other. So we're taking the best learnings that are happening on the ground and sharing that information with other peers and through curated resources and events to make sure that the whole industry stays up to date and that we're not having to learn our own lessons. Learning from failure is good, but you don't have to do it every time and you don't have to do it yourself. So that's a quick overview of our projects, and I can get into more depth around some of the other ones if we have time.
Hey folks, Tappan Parker. I work with the World Resource Institute as the outreach and engagement lead for a project called Systems Change Lab. For folks who don't know, the World Resource Institute is one of the largest environmental think tanks in the world. We have a global presence with offices in, I think, 9 countries. It might be as many as 10 or 11 now. But we are 2,000 people strong, and a lot of our work is focused on developing research, but really focused on how do we take research and turn that into action on the ground? How do we think about implementation? How do we think through how our work can really impact communities and how different kinds of communities, different kinds of stakeholders can use research to affect change on the ground, to take action, to build resilience in their communities. WRI itself is broken out into several different work streams and teams and programs. We like to call it a matrix, and it's about as complicated as a matrix. So we have a cities team, we have a climate team, we have food, land and forests, all sorts of folks. Ben might actually know more about our urban resiliency stuff than I do. I do not work with the city's team, but there are quite a few urban resiliency tools that we produce focused on climate adaptation. And our city teams work directly in cities trying to make sure that people have access to the tools and research they need to build resilience in their own communities. Our approach to data is really twofold, I would say. One is making sure that we have good data out there that people can use and people can rely on. And then the second is making sure that we can translate that data for audiences who don't necessarily have time to dig into the work that we do. And so the work I do with Systems Change Lab is really focused on that kind of stakeholder engagement and how we help people understand the state of climate action. Which is a big part of the work I do, and a big report the WRI puts out called the State of Climate Action Report, to be quite pithy. But really it's just focused on how do we help folks understand what is happening and use that to their advantage and use that to be able to make change in their own communities.
Great segue. Thank you, Tappan. So a lot of folks may have some idea of what planning departments do. Maybe one of the lesser known aspects is resilience. So I work on the coastal resilience team with the Boston Planning Department. The planning department itself looks at zoning, building reviews, a lot of other things, but my team really focuses on coastal resilience. So looking at where is the water going to go in different scenarios, whether it's 2030, 2050, 2070, and beyond, and then how do we address these risks? So talking about data a bit, we contract with experts who can pretty much pinpoint at which levels the water will be by which years. And we use that to then go to the communities, sometimes with designs or sometimes just to share the information and say, hey, this is what the risk is, this is what we're thinking about doing. Sometimes they have their own approaches, so we try to align with what a property owner is doing or what a community wants to see done. A lot of the time we will work that into public realm amenities, whether it's a park or a raised sidewalk, crosswalk, and really try to be creative because there's limited space and we have to figure out essentially it's how high do we have to build and when, and what can we do, what kind of materials are we going to use. So I think of my job as kind of connecting experts, the folks who can tell us where the water will be, and then engineers and designers who can create infrastructure that will address these risks.
A pleasure to be here. I'm Fernando. I'm Director of Economics at Aretian. Aretian is a startup born out of the design school here at Harvard and the Harvard Innovation Lab. We provide data for decision making for urban planners. What we have typically seen is that cities or universities or real estate companies, they make decisions a little bit intuitively or haphazardly sometimes, or typically master plans have a lot of input from engineers or architects, but not a lot from data on tax base or projections or people working, moving, logistics, climate sustainability. So we bring that data aspect. Right now we are building an application which is basically like the SimCity, maybe if you guys are too young, but SimCity for urban planning, that's what we're building right now. So we have been mostly being a consulting company so far, and now we are kind of migrating into this SaaS application that we think that we can leverage to keep our partners and clients more honest. Because basically the idea is that once you make a commitment that within 3 to 6 months or a year or 2 years you will achieve these milestones, it's already in the server, in the application. So, we are just like tracking and monitoring and comparing different cities. And the other thing is that we have noticed that in our brief experience as a startup company, large cities have a lot of resources and great minds like Boston to do all these great analysis, but like smaller cities do not. But they have the same problems, right? Because urban problems are very similar and climate hazards are very similar, but they just don't have the analytical capabilities. So we try to work more with like small and medium-sized cities.
Thank you. So thinking about the strategies that you use, how do you leverage and turn complex data or modeling into decisions or designs that communities and institutions can use? And also, what approaches help ensure equity is baked into this analysis and decision-making process and not just into the outcomes? We can maybe start with you.
I can start. So so our main goal was trying to bring data to decision making. So a typical example would be a university is trying to expand, like Harvard, building all these new all these new buildings, and they have kind of like an intuitive vision. Like somewhere there's like a McKinsey 50 slides deck saying we will be the new Kendall Square or something, but probably Harvard is doing an amazing job, but in other cases they are not. So what we're trying to do is making them, forcing them to argue with data which we provide, whether that is achievable. So we use, satellite data, OpenStreetMap data, urban planning, logistics. Now we're moving more to real-time data, like sensor data, especially in climate, tracking air pollution and other variables. So initially we were approaching this problem from a very academic standpoint because we were coming from academia, and it didn't work because at the end of the day, decision makers didn't even want to read the analysis. They want just like the recommendation. So we just, over the years, it's been hard, but we learned that actually we needed to move to something that was more digestible. So now we have our ways of summarizing all this information into like, there are 3 columns, color-coded, bad, great, and even better, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of semaphores in our app and in our presentations. And we're constantly trying to learn more about what is the best way to make the decision-making from the process from the real estate company or the municipality or the university, how we can simplify it and make it easier and faster.
So I want to focus on a project that I'm working on, Long Wharf. Long Wharf is a major flood pathway into downtown. By 2070, it's projected that coastal storm surge could reach as far as the steps of City Hall. So that's been a priority of our department for a few years. And want to hone in on the equity piece that was part of the question. So we didn't want to just put together a study from our own perspective. We didn't want to go in and say, this is what we want to do, and then just do it. That's not really where the field is. That wouldn't be right to the community. So what we did is we hosted over a dozen stakeholder meetings, whether it was focus groups, bringing in different types of small businesses by different categories, looking at all the different stakeholders, utilities, really everyone who might be affected by anything we do on the wharf. And it's a very, very common place that people spend time, and bustling, and a lot of tourist attractions. So really any kind of activity you can imagine is happening on Long Wharf. So it's very complicated for that reason. And we really wanted to make sure that we brought everyone to the table. So that is how we wound up with the report that we have today, that we actually just published today in draft form. So in my opinion, we covered all our bases, and we really genuinely tried to get as many perspectives in these rooms as we possibly could. And I think that's reflected in the report.
So our approach to data and I think to equity focuses on, I would say, 2 main respects. With WRI and especially with Systems Change Lab, the project I work on, a lot of our focus is in understanding what data we have out there. If you have data, if you know what data exists, you can use that data to understand what needs to change, and then you can actually go out and make that change that you want to see. But a lot of times we actually find that there's not a lot of data out there. There's not a lot of good data that exists, or at least that's not publicly available to help with decision making. a big part of our role as Systems Change Lab, as researchers, as analysts, is to understand what data is out there, but also understand what isn't. And what that means is a lot of times you'll go to a website, you'll go to any institution, they will try to tell you what the answer is and that there is data out there. Something that we do is we actually publicly say, this data does not exist. Here are 100 indicators that we would love to tell you more about. We don't have data, and we cannot tell you what is going on with them. We have a general sense. We can write a couple paragraphs and say, here's a vibe on what's going on right now. But without the data, we really can't tell anyone how bad things are, what really needs to change, or why things aren't changing the way we would hope to see them change. So that's one aspect of the work we do, is trying to understand the data environment, what data exists, what doesn't, and how do we fill those gaps. The second part is understanding where data is not enough. And I like to think of this through the ways of knowing, which are based on lived experience, based on academic knowledge, and probably based on your work actually implementing solutions. And we like to think that the sum total of all human knowledge is on the internet out there somewhere. If AI could just collect it all, we would be able to learn anything. And that's just simply not true. What's on the internet is what people have put there, what people have written, what people have published. But there's so much knowledge out there that isn't on the internet, that's inside of us, that's inside of the local communities that live in these different areas that we're trying to enact change in. And a lot of the time, the best data that we have is the data we get from talking to those communities and understanding what's going on the ground with them, what their needs are, what they think the solutions are to their problems, and us coming in and identifying how we make that resonate, how we make sure that the data reflects their needs, and that we're really trying to engage with those communities to ensure that the data actually matches what's needed on the ground. That would be the two ways I would take for that, but a lot more I could talk about there.
Perfect, thanks. And I would reiterate a lot of what's been said. I think particularly in the data, in the climate field, data is complex and it's complicated and it's overwhelming for a lot of decision makers. I've spent a lot of my career working with chief administrative officers or city managers, and the level of information that they can process is different than the project manager who's working on the project and maybe doing the risk assessment and has the register. And so I think it's really important to recognize that, when we do province, state level assessments and we're looking at all the different aspects of a state across all sectors, then we're looking at all the data around the climate, so climate hazards, exposure levels, and we're looking at the adaptive capacity of the community to change. That is a lot of data. And so, to the points earlier made, it's about finding different ways to share that information so that it is something that people can absorb, process, and then action as a result of it. And that will depend on the audience in which you're working with. But executive summaries or data matrices, lots of visuals work really well for a lot of communities. So you're seeing a lot of tools being developed right now that are mapping oriented. One of the tools we're working with right now on flooding risk and return on investment is all about taking existing municipal data on their assets, layered with water shed level data, and then demonstrating under the different flooding profiles what is the potential damage that's going to happen. Then we can layer in, well, based on different mitigation strategies, what's the actual return on investment of those investments in infrastructure? So that's important from an economic perspective, but it's also important from a visual perspective. I can literally show you a map of the areas that are going to be impacted. And when I make certain other choices, I can show you the pullback in terms of what will be demonstrated. Most of our people that we work with are highly visual. And so how you show that information matters. It really is important to be talking about climate risk and the options, all the adaptation, all the resilience in plain language, whether that be visual or written format. Then on the equity side, super important, don't not to miss the fact that equity needs to come through in decisions, because a little bit of my concern is that we talk about process, we still need to make sure it comes through in the actual decisions that are being made. But in my practice, it's really important not only to make sure you bring in all the diverse perspectives and voices, but you actually need to be strategic about it. You need to look at the problem and say, we think whatever group of people or situation are going to be most impacted. by what's currently happening or what could happen as a result of change. And then go talk to them. And then ask them, who did we miss? Who do we have systemic barriers in our own lenses about that we don't understand who are being impacted? And then bring them into the process early. So bring them in when you're scoping that project. Figure out, like, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? And to your point, you might actually already know what would benefit you. I'm a big believer in lived experience and saying, like, you know, you live in a community, you may not be an engineer or a planner or any of those professions, but you know exactly how this community is used, how it's not well used, what could be maladaptive. And so having them come in and even then help them to define what data you should be looking at. But then making sure that good process results in good outcomes by making sure that the process weights towards money and action going into those areas where we actually need to make change.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about strategic partnerships and the importance. Could you touch on some partnerships that you have in the work that you do? And also maybe explain a little bit about how you maintain momentum and accountability in partnerships over time. And we can start with you, Stephanie.
Okay, sure. Partnerships are a really big, joyful part of the work that I do. I really believe in data-driven decisions, and yet they're not sufficient. So if you don't bring people along through the process, you don't have that buy-in, and you don't have decisions or outcomes that have actually been created by, like, the ops manager in a municipality, then you're probably not going to have as easy path to success on outcomes and implementation as you think. And so partnerships, I think, are critical to moving things forward, and I think that they're part of everything that we do. Climate Risk Institute takes that to heart. We partner on almost everything that we do. So one of the major initiatives that we are a part of is a partnership between 3 major organizations, and it's called the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee. It's actually a protocol, but it is gold standard for doing risk assessments on public infrastructure. And we are one amongst 3 organizations that steward it globally, and that takes work. So that's an example of the work that we do in partnership. But I mean, honestly, I could probably rattle off, of the 25 active projects that are going on right now, probably 20 of them are in partnership, and the other ones might just be a little bit too small. But we value different perspectives and recognize that it takes work. So you asked about how to build momentum. And I think one of the things that you want to think about when you go into a partnership is that a partnership is a strategic initiative. It is a project. We often dedicate project management, time and attention to projects, but we don't to our partnerships. We say, great, just come into the room, we'll just figure it out. It's great. In my books, just treat it like any other strategy. You get in the room together, you build the vision, the objectives, the principles of how you're gonna work together, have a real and honest conversation about your organization's capacity for taking on work and being in partnership, so that you can create a work plan and a budget and all of those things together. And know that life's gonna ebb and flow. There will be other priorities that arise. And so recognizing that there's gonna be shifts and change, and built in the ways to connect with each other, to check in if it's still working. The other part about partnerships that I think is super important is just how we deal with our tools. Always begin with the end in mind. And so when you start a partnership out, think about, what does success really look like for this partnership? Because when you get to that state of success, you should celebrate it and then acknowledge it and then be able to move on to other priorities. Because a lot of times we do partnerships and we continue partnerships when they're long since past living out their real value. And so I was actually privileged with the opportunity to wrap up a 10-year partnership on sustainability, a 100-year vision, but a 10-year partnership in Calgary. And when we got to that 10 years, it was like, you know what? We don't need this partnership anymore. We have done the work to seed the climate office and the work in the community and all these other things that are happening just naturally now. So we got together through a big party, wrote a few articles, and everybody went away happy.
Can I just steal your answer? That was great. Maybe a couple things to add, because really that was top notch, and I would say many of the same things. Is partnerships should be equal. When you are doing the work that we're doing, it's really important to make sure that we are sharing the load, we're sharing the credit for the work we're doing, and also, if possible, that we are sharing in our success, and especially coming from a nonprofit, that includes in funding. It's not fair to try and ask another peer institution, another academic institution, to do work with us for free. And that is especially true in the Global South. So if we're talking about equal partnerships as a large research institute, it's important for us to make sure that we are bringing other people to the table, but also that we're bringing funding sources to them as well. That'll be the quick thing I'll say on partnership.
Thanks. Want to echo what's been said already also. One partnership that I'll highlight is the City of Boston's partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we're working with them on a 6-year study that's really going to identify a lot of work that is for longer term coastal solutions. It's work that the city itself is not as equipped to design or engineer or maintain. So a big part of partnerships is identifying who can do what, who should be doing what. And that's kind of the beauty of that synthesis is where we're working more and more toward solutions that cover all the bases, that do what needs to be done by the folks who can do it. And there's a lot of other entities that we work with too. Community partnerships are really important. We know who we need to talk to get a community on board. And we want to bring everyone on board as much as we can. Another partnership is other state agencies. They're often regulating a lot of our work, so we maintain very good regular contact with them. FEMA, we were in touch with a lot more before they started cutting our grants. But it's really about figuring out what the best synthesis is and who you need to have in the room, and making it work and getting it done. And then, as was said already, moving on to the next partnership.
So I'll add very briefly, because I understand we have little time, but in the startup world, there's a lot of competition between startups, a lot of stinginess in terms of IP. So like naturally, I think startups make the mistake of not partnering enough. We have an opposite view, because at the end of the day, like what we have noticed in our experience is that if we partner with the right partners that have specific expertise in things that we do not have, there's a obviously higher chance of winning the RFP or the grant or the opportunity, but also down the road, we're just building a better service product, a more consistent product that includes not only logistics, climate resiliency, air pollution, air quality, and so on and so forth.
Wonderful. I think we just have one more minute, but to end on a more optimistic note, given that we have so much data and new technology, if one or two of you just really briefly wants to share something that you are excited about in terms of the work that you do or collaborations or just where you see the field going, that would be lovely.
I can say just 2 things very briefly. We started a partnership with NVIDIA. We are to build our real-time infrastructure to monitor like real-time data and sensors in cities. That's super fun. That's amazing. And the other thing is that recently we noticed that there's a market pull from like climate resiliency considerations. And unfortunately, we started like more mercenary, right? We needed to win bids and so on and so forth. But now our clients are asking for these things. So we are investing a ton, obviously because we believe in it. But what's great about it is that there's also a market demand. Like if we were not investing in this field, then we would be like running behind the others.
Just say one thing quickly. I think we're at a place now where we don't, at least from my perspective, people are on board with this work, and there's not as much convincing in Boston or in many areas of the need to do this work. So it makes our jobs easier to go in, with that already kind of established.
I'll add a brief one. I am actually very, very excited about the potential of AI, even though I think there's a lot of flaws with it, to translate research into the language of the person that needs it most. And I don't mean from English to French, but potentially from an academic to an investor or to a policymaker or to just a civil servant just trying to understand what matters and what the research means for them.
Time for one last, okay. So I'll take a different track, love all of those. I think the thing that inspires me the most is the fact that folks like yourselves are doing this work and that you're getting training on climate-related items in your other professions through your general thing. So it is being mainstreamed. Because climate, especially climate adaptation, isn't a profession, but it's a duty of care in all of the professions that you're working in.
Thank you all so much for your time, and for everyone here, if you have more questions, make sure to stick around for the dinner. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the panel on Financing the Future of Climate and Sustainability. My name is Mary Chen, and I'm an MBA at Harvard Business School. Prior to school, I worked at Bain Capital's Double Impact Group, focusing on climate and sustainability. And after school, I'll be joining Lime Rock New Energy's Energy Transition Growth Fund. I'm very passionate about the intersection of climate and finance, and I'm pumped to be joined by 4 leaders who each represent a different piece of that puzzle. We have voices from philanthropy, private investment, global public finance, and climate risk and resilience. And together, they'll help us unpack the climate finance ecosystem and think about how each of us might play a role in accelerating progress. So we'll start by defining the space, understanding what is climate finance, and what kinds of capital each panelist mobilize. Then we'll shift into some of the challenges and opportunities. And finally, we'll wrap with a conversation focused on careers, how each of them entered the fields, what skills are most needed, and advice for those of you hoping to join us and work at the intersection of finance and impact. So with that, please give a warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for being here. As I mentioned, each of you represents a different piece of this puzzle. Can you all briefly share your name, role, and organization? And then what type of capital your organization mobilizes, or how you help accelerate the climate transition.
Hi, I'm Joanna Messing. I'm the CEO of Grow All Climate Fund, and we are a philanthropy, which means we provide grants. And our focus within the climate space is on energy transition. We work primarily outside of the US, and we primarily work to help civil society organizations, and I'll talk a little bit later about the role of civil society organizations in catalyzing climate transition.
Hi, I'm Joanna, number 2. So I'm Vice President at the Climate Risk Institute, and I work really heavily on the climate adaptation file. So adaptation finance actually only accounts for 5% of climate finance, so that is definitely where I'm focusing all of my effort. The work that we do at CRI is a lot on quantifying risk as well, so we do that work so that we know what our vulnerabilities are and we can identify what the risk is and then take action to reduce it. I see adaptation very much as risk management. And then the other side of our work, I guess, is in nature-based solutions. So I work a lot on how we can work with nature to reduce climate risks and also build our natural capital. So we work also on kind of nature finance as well at the same time, including how we actually financially value ecosystem services that nature provides to people that actually do not appear in our financial accounting systems or in economic decisions. Actually, the value we assign is often 0.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Magaziner. I'm a Senior Vice President at OIC, which stands for Orion Infrastructure Capital. We're a $5 billion private equity firm that focuses on making credit, growth, and equity investments in middle market infrastructure companies. Our growth and our equity strategies, we have an explicit mandate to focus on environmentally innovative businesses. And across all of our strategies, we try to minimize dilution for the existing ownership and entrepreneurs that we partner with.
Hello. My name is Bayır Tsitsik Jigmedash. I think the longest name here. Yeah. So nice to meet you, and thank you very much, Salata Institute, for inviting me. I had a long trip from South Korea, where the Green Climate Fund is based. And then it's very nice to be back for my alma mater. Almost 20 years ago, I was exactly like you, sitting and trying to figure out my next step and my career choices and options. So I work for the Green Climate Fund. This is public fund. It's the largest multilateral public fund that the fund consists of the member states' pledges and contributions. And we are the very important implementing vehicle of the Paris Agreement. And do you know what's the biggest milestone right now for this year, next month? What's going to happen? Yes, COP, but what else? It will be 10 years anniversary of the Paris Agreement. So it's quite a big milestone, and it's a big milestone in the sense that all the member states and together private and philanthropy should assess how the progress, whether we really achieving the goal and how's the progress. So the reason I mentioned the Paris Agreement is that, as I mentioned, the Green Climate Fund was established to implement the Paris Agreement. So we are the main implementing vehicle and main financing arm of the Paris Agreement. So I said that we are the largest public multilateral fund, which means we, up to now, we financed around 18 billion projects around the world. And we have 314 projects up to now, more than 200 partners. That includes all diverse entities, private sectors, non-profit sectors, international INGOs, think tanks, startups, accelerators, and also government, national government. So it's really diverse stakeholders that we finance the projects. We only finance. We don't do, for example, research, or we don't do sort of other activities.
Great, thank you all. So we'll start with Joanna Messing and Jonathan. You two sit on opposite ends of the climate finance spectrum. So Joanna working in philanthropy and Jonathan in private infrastructure investment, but with a shared goal of accelerating the clean energy transition. Joanna, can you start by telling us how grant funding and other forms of philanthropy can help unlock new clean energy markets? And where have you seen philanthropy successfully pave the way for private investment?
Absolutely, and this is one of the really exciting areas of our work. So I mentioned earlier that we support a lot of civil society organizations, and what that means is work with nonprofits and think tanks that help to change the environment in which individual investment decisions are made. This works in a whole range of ways. So on the one hand, you have the policy and regulatory environment, which is critical for ensuring that clean energy projects work well. If you don't have a proper feed-in tariff, if you don't have streamlined permitting processes, all of these things can be the difference between a project being viable and bankable or not. We've learned that, for example, offshore wind projects can have between 2 and 10 years in permitting time. That is the difference between it being profitable and not profitable. So a lot of the role that nonprofits and think tanks can play are, first of all, sharing lessons around what good policy is from one country to another, but also really ensuring that communities are engaged. Because one of the things that can really slow down processes is when a community isn't engaged fruitfully. There can be workers that are concerned about losing their livelihood. There can be environmental impacts that have not been discussed. So that is a role that philanthropy and civil society can play to really get in ahead of time and see where are things possible. So some examples that I would give right now, we're involved with some really exciting work around iconic projects, which is basically, you may have heard of Greenpeace's carbon bombs that came out some years ago, which was like the fossil fuel projects which must not be built in order to ensure that we don't overrun our climate budget. This is the opposite side, which is what are clean energy projects that everybody can get behind. These are things like building solar on top of abandoned coal mines. You're really not going to get a lot of resistance to that. So how can we help to create packages that enable private investors to see that? There's a whole range of other things that can happen, including technical assistance to government agencies, to public institutions, and to communities to ensure that they are able to build these as quickly as possible. And then the final thing I will say is there's a lot of role for philanthropy and innovation. And innovation comes both from helping people to start new organizations with brilliant ideas. That's a lot of what we do. We play the role of a venture capitalist, but in the nonprofit space, and again, particularly in emerging economies where there's been less investment. So somebody who has an amazing idea, how do you help them take it from idea into actually being an organization, or test an idea that then a private investor could watch and go, you know, that looks like a good idea, we'll pick it up, but we couldn't take the risk.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I think that's a really important message that there is a need for collaboration between philanthropy, the public sector, and private capital providers such as ourselves to cooperate to make some of these transformational projects happen. What do I look for as a private investor when we're evaluating opportunities in infrastructure? I mean, in infrastructure, there's a lot of capital investment, a lot of dollars going in up front. And there's some risks that we know how to take well and how to manage well, but there are always unknown unknowns. And where we look for the most assistance is to try to minimize those as much as possible. So when it comes to creating predictability in a policy environment, or having an efficient permitting process, or assuring that there's going to be an adequate supply of trained workers available to provide some of the necessary services, whether it's welding, electricians, and so on and so forth. Those are all things that kind of are the bare essentials of a successful project. And as investors, we can bring the capital, we can help businesses and contractors manage well and troubleshoot. But those are things that we aren't equipped to do and need support to accomplish. And it really is about having all those parties coming to the table to make sure you've got a path to success that's carved out for you. That's what we're looking for.
Thank you. Bayard Setseg, we just talked about how private investors look for projects that meet market rate returns. Can you give an example of how the flexibility that your fund has in blending grants, loans, equity, and guarantees allows you to make projects bankable and crowd in additional financing, and in particular from the private sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's one of our unique sort of feature of GCF, that we are quite versatile in terms of the financing structure. But before that, I should note that because of the Paris Agreement, our project is devoted, or we finance projects only in developing countries, because the core of the Paris Agreement is really to those countries who suffered because of the developed countries industry or the gas emissions. We all agree that we should help those developing countries who hasn't been that much contributed. However, they've been immensely suffered. So in that sense, we only finance projects, but via, for example, private companies or NGOs financing them, but the main beneficiary should be in developing countries. So that I should note that. But because it's developing country context, and in a way we are development institutions like World Bank or UN. Because we have that angle, we do have another very interesting arm, which is capacity building and readiness grant. Although we are financing institution, but we have this very big readiness grant that makes us quite a unique institution other than the other private fund. So we have so far $500 million US has spent just as a grant, just to help. There is no requirement to return back. Grant to developing countries to build the capacity. So the problem is that we have money. The problem is it's not so much of having the money, accessing the money. It's the developing countries' problem is that how they come up with the bankable projects, and then how to absorb this money in their financial ecosystem in their countries. For example, Pacific Islands, it's like very small islands. Cook Island, it's only 10,000 people, but the countries, basically most of the Pacific Islands are sinking. It's very soon they will be almost like non-existent, unfortunately. But then when we talk about the bankable projects, like technology related, they don't have human capacity. They don't have that commercial or banking expertise, and they cannot come up with bankable projects. So because of that problem, challenges, as I said, we do have this big grant capacity building arm. In terms of the private sector, we do work very closely with the private sector. In fact, 2/3 of our financing goes to the private sector. It's around $8 billion so far. We finance $8 billion US for the private sector. But as you mentioned, one of the unique feature of our fund is that we do have the blended financing model. We're not restricted only like certain financial instruments. It's all financial instruments, starting from equity, loan, concessional loan, even debt swap. So all various financial instruments that we can use depending on the context and projects. And then lastly, a very important, our GCF's sort of the principle is that all our project financing should bring paradigm shift. It's not just like business as usual, just to continue this and that, but it really should be very innovative and creative, and should bring a paradigm shift, which means it should be very innovative and technology oriented. So far, all the projects that we financed out of 314 projects, around 85% of the money went to the technology and innovation. And we always look for greatest innovation. It could be startup, it doesn't matter, but as long as it's scalable and it brings the impact, we finance those ideas and technologies and innovations.
Thank you. And maybe a follow-up question for you, Jonathan. You mentioned that OIC has credit and growth and equity.
Yes.
Do you see blending kind of across those parts of the fund for a specific deal, or how do you think about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We have different limited partners in each of the funds. So there's potential for conflicts of interest if we have each fund participating in the same individual investment. It gets very complicated. So generally, we don't have individual investments that each fund or two of the three would participate in at the same time. We have a very rigorous internal process where we determine which bucket an individual deal should fall into. But
and what are the flavors? Because like Bayer-Setseg, she mentioned the types of things that she's investing in are very innovative. And so from an infrastructure side and across the different funds, what are the flavors of
how does the risk spectrum across the three? So there is a spectrum in terms of maturity. The growth fund was designed to look at earlier stage opportunities, as implied by the name. And the credit fund and the equity fund will look at opportunities that are technologically proven, so they're not set up to take any tech risk, but are equipped to take other sorts of risks. So in the equity fund will be subordinated to debt. And on the credit fund, there's always risk inherent in projects, but they're looking to make kind of a lower risk adjusted return than the equity fund would by sitting in the senior position in the capital structure. But I think that leads to a really interesting point, which I've heard you reference, and you as well, Joanna, about the role of public-private capital or philanthropy in catalyzing innovation at the earliest stages and playing sort of a venture or even pre-venture role. I think that's fundamental, because when you look at private equity firm like myself, even in our growth fund, each individual fund might have investments of, in 6 to 12 different portfolio companies, call it, at least at our strategy. In infrastructure, when you're producing a certain amount of megawatt hours from a solar project or battery storage project, or a fixed amount of renewable diesel from a refinery, whatever it might be, the opportunities to generate additional upside beyond your base case when you underwrote the deal, it's naturally limited by the physics of the asset that you've invested in. But there's plenty of risk to the downside. So we can't really take what we call binary risks on technology or even early stage development for projects that are still going through permitting or what have you, because the risk of getting a 0 on one of those 6 to 12 investments means, we have to push really hard to go above the base case, and there's only so much we could do on all those other deals. So I think that's where we find ourselves often, even in the growth fund, is going to companies that have demonstrated viability on technology or are sufficiently advanced and have a short, clear path towards the final stages of permitting, say, with the assistance of catalytic financing that you guys might be providing. And then we take the ball from there and move it to the next step, which is often the more capital intensive step. And so that's where the private capital and the larger dollar checks that we can write, that's where we start to step in and play a role.
Thank you. So far we've talked about how different kinds of capital can come together to fund climate solutions. But an equally important question is where the capital should go and how we understand the real world risks that shape those decisions. Joanna, you help policymakers and financiers quantify climate risks and recognize the value of nature in reducing them. Can you talk about how the financial sector is evolving in the way that it measures and prices those risks, and what still needs to change for more investment to flow into resilience and adaptation?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, we've actually talked quite a lot about climate risks, physical climate risks in all the kind of like disclosure standards. I think everybody is probably fairly familiar with that now. So there's that kind of risk kind of profiling, I guess, so that people know what their own internal risks are and what the risks of the things they're investing in are as well. I'm not convinced that is that mature yet. I think there was a lot of focus on disclosures around greenhouse gas emissions and not so much on physical climate risks. And now there seems to be a step backwards from kind of both of those things at the moment. In terms of adaptation finance and getting actual money to flow, the problem that we have in adaptation is that if everything goes super well, the best case scenario is nothing happens. So we're actually talking about long-term savings and avoided losses. We're not talking about short-term returns. So it makes it quite difficult to make a business case for investment, particularly from private sector finance in adaptation projects when the return is long-term avoided losses, basically. And we just have not cracked that nut yet, basically. Even working with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which has kind of a bit more latitude to kind of do slightly different things. They have a green infrastructure fund, but they only at the moment invest in mitigation projects, climate mitigation projects. One fund that I have seen is the Green Bond that has invested in Toronto's River Don naturalization project, but that's an exception. So I think that is a nut to crack. we are seeing a lot of investment in infrastructure, though. We had our budget just this week in Canada, so we have a lot of billions of dollars going into infrastructure. And one of the things we're trying to focus on is to make the most of that money, because if we can bring in private sector investment into infrastructure as well, that would be great. But by really looking at how we can make the infrastructure, just the mainstream infrastructure, climate resilient, as well as kind of layering in natural infrastructure, which brings so many more benefits, like helping to store water, helping to reduce urban heat islands, helping to improve biodiversity, carbon storage, recreation. We are not taking account of all those co-benefits at the moment when we're doing particularly grey infrastructure projects. We're not thinking about systems of infrastructure. So I think that is a key thing to think about. And then on the the last point on the public-private interaction, there's really important changes in international standards when it comes to nature. So we've had 2 ISO standards just came out last week about nature risk in biodiversity in companies and also natural capital accounting. But the one that no one is looking at, I don't think, is there's an international standard on natural resources and how it could be integrated into mainstream financial statements. It will be out in December 2025. It was put to consultation and only 49 responses were received globally. This is key. I mean, if we start actually valuing our natural assets on financial statements, that will completely change and transform our relationship with nature, and nature will actually feature in our financial system. So that's something to watch.
Thank you so much. So many students here are thinking about how to build careers that connect finance and climate impact. Can you each talk through what kinds of skills or mindsets are most needed today in your respective areas? So maybe, Joanna, we'll start with you again. I know you just talked through a lot of the challenges within the space.
Yeah, I think the advice I would give is to follow your passion. I'm a river scientist. I never thought I would be sitting on a finance panel at Harvard. That was not in my crystal ball. But I got to this place by kind of always finding something to fight for that I really believed in. That's what's led me here. So I think every job is a climate job. So wherever you're working, whether you're in finance or engineering or geoscience or mechanical or whatever you're doing, you will end up working on climate and nature, and because it should be mainstreamed everywhere, but you need to be passionate about it and be able to convince others that they should be doing work too.
Great. Jonathan, do you want to go next? I know you have a law background.
Yeah.
And tell us what someone who wants to work in kind of private infrastructure investment needs.
Sure. Well, I mean, the conventional path in private equity or private investment always applies, I guess, in our space in terms of the investment banking or consulting to MBA and then investing. That's the normal path. But what I particularly love and what I also look for when we're hiring in the infrastructure and in the environmental innovation space is that it is fundamentally interdisciplinary. Every project we work on involves engineers, lawyers, scientists, financial professionals. So I think follow your passion, certainly, but also expose yourselves to different disciplines and different ways of thinking about problem solving, which you can get from those different disciplines. And that always is what jumps out to me on a resume, is not just, okay, which bank did you work at, which consulting firm did you work at, because you'll be indistinguishable from everybody else. But what have you done that sets you up to have a different perspective and to bring something new to the table as we look at these sorts of challenging projects that are interdisciplinary in nature.
Yes. If I may, I am mindful about time, but quickly comment on the previous question in terms of the challenges, the sources and the financing challenges. Very quickly, is it paying public funds? As I said, our fund consists of the pledge from the member states, but we do have right now big challenge because the member states, the pledges are sort of drying up and reducing. For example, because we're here in the US, for example, the US was the biggest pledge contributor. They pledged $6 billion. And however, they the U.S. government only delivered 2 billion, and then, as you know, all the changes happened, and they even resigned it, the pledges and contribution, and that tremendously affected our fund. And also, as well as the biggest contributor is UK and Japan, UK, France, and Italy. But because of the Ukraine war, all this contribution in pledges has been significantly reduced, which means we also have a quite shrinking finance. So I just going to just outline how financing is also connected with the geopolitics and national politics in terms of the resources. So in terms of my career, yeah, similar to other panelists, my background is lawyer. When I was a student at Harvard Law School, as I mentioned almost 20 years ago, I never ever even thought that I will end up in a climate space doing this type of work. But I'm so happy because it's a very meaningful work. I'm still doing my legal professional sort of activity job, but it is very meaningful in terms of the bringing stopping the climate crisis. The one thing I would advise for the students is that, as I mentioned here, and this is quite an existential crisis, one thing that it requires from each of us is that we should be very out-of-box thinking. When you study in this kind of big establishments, we always have this kind of traditional mindset, maybe quite molded mindset. I'm not saying you will be, but in general, when I graduated, I had the set of idea. But then in this modern with the climate crisis, you really need to have have this innovative idea and out-of-box idea. So that's the only advice.
Thank you. And we will end where we started, Joanna.
Great, and I actually think I echo everything that's been said, but I also have my MBA, and I would say that the most helpful skill that I've had has been business planning and strategy planning because of a lot of the things that have been said here. We are in potentially unprecedented geopolitical turmoil. We are in markets which are not transitioning, they are transforming. And we are in a time when we need to develop new business models. And often these business models are ones that don't have precedents for investment, that are difficult to be able to prove that they are unrisky, that are operating with different constraints. And so the ability to be able to develop a strategy and a business plan and a model that reflects not only the reality of today, but that actually looks forward to how our markets and world are transforming and see a different path and be able to articulate that to investors and partners is utterly critical, because we're seeing hard skills come and go in demand, but the need to be able to see a pathway and a strategy and a new business model is not something that's going to be replaceable. And then I also just really want to say that the passion point is incredibly important, and what you get in return for that is a life that is filled with purpose. We often in the United States are in a search for happiness, but actually they've found that you are happy when you live a life with purpose. And so what these careers offer is the ability to be creative, innovative, and the gift of living a life with purpose. So I welcome you all to join us.
Well, thank you all so much for bringing these ideas to life, and we'll end on that note. Please give a round of applause.
So now the much awaited time for the networking dinner is now happening. I also want to give a shout out to our virtual participants. Thank you so much for being part of this. And there's also a virtual networking session that you should have been invited to via email that is being conducted by our alumni partners at HACE. So if you don't have that invitation, please reach out to us via email and we would like to include you in that. And please join us next door at Tickner Lounge for our networking session. There will be employers who have been speaking today, as well as some who will be joining us tomorrow. And enjoy the conversation. And also, if you haven't registered for the Expo tomorrow, please register. We hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody, so much.